Elira Voss grew up believing that love was supposed to feel safe. Her mother used to say that a true mate was like a warm coat in winter, something that covered you, protected you, and never once made you feel cold, even when the whole world outside was falling apart. For 23 years, Elira believed that. She believed it especially when it came to Dain Ashford, the boy she had grown up beside, the boy who became her mate the day she turned 18, the boy who held her hand at every pack gathering like she was something precious he never wanted to put down. Their story began in a small village at the edge of the Ashwood Pack territory, where the trees grew so close together that sunlight had to fight its way through the leaves just to touch the ground. Elira's family were healers, known throughout the pack for their steady hands and their calm way of speaking to frightened patients. Dain's family were warriors, proud and loud, the kind of family that filled a room the moment they walked into it. Nobody expected the quiet healer's daughter and the loud warrior's son to become mates. But the bond did not care about expectations. It simply happened, the way lightning happens, without asking permission from anyone. For years, their bond felt like the safest thing in the world. Dain used to walk 2 miles out of his way just to bring her breakfast before training. He used to sit outside her window at night and talk to her through the wooden shutters until she fell asleep listening to his voice. He used to say, again and again, that he would rather die than see her hurt. Elira believed every word of it. That belief followed her all the way to the day everything changed, the day the messengers arrived from the Alpha King's territory with urgent news that shook the entire pack to its core. The Alpha King, Vasilios Drager, was dying. He was not just any Alpha King, he was the oldest ruling Alpha in the entire region, a man who had led wolves and humans through wars, famines, and treaties for over 300 years. His health had been declining for months, but nobody expected the illness to move so quickly. The healers who worked in his palace had tried everything: herbs, rituals, blood magic passed down from ancient packs, but nothing worked. His body was shutting down organ by organ, and the entire kingdom was bracing itself for the possibility of losing him. There was only one old cure left to try, a method so rare that most young wolves had only heard about it in bedtime stories. It was called a mate bond transfer. According to ancient pack law, if a fated mate offered their life energy freely, a small piece of that energy could be transferred into a dying wolf, giving them enough strength to heal. It was risky. It could weaken the mate who gave the energy, but it had saved lives before, and it was the last hope anyone had for the Alpha King. The council sent word to every pack in the region, asking for volunteers whose bonds were strong enough to withstand the transfer. Very few bonds were strong enough. A weak bond meant a wasted transfer, and a wasted transfer meant the king's death and the volunteers' suffering, all for nothing. Elira and Dain's bond, however, was known throughout the region as one of the strongest in years. Elders spoke about it. Young wolves envied it. It had been talked about since the day it formed, the kind of bond that made old wolves say things like, "True mates like that only come once in a generation." So when the council came looking for the strongest bonds nearby, they came straight to Dain's family. Elira remembers the day the council arrived at their village. She remembers Dain standing taller than she had ever seen him stand, his shoulders pulled back, his jaw locked in the same expression he used whenever he wanted to look important in front of people who mattered. She remembers the way he looked at the council leader, not at her, when he answered their question. "Yes," he said, "my mate will do it." Nobody asked Elira. Nobody looked at her face to see if she agreed. The decision moved forward the way water moves downhill, quickly, without hesitation, without anyone stopping to ask if the water wanted to fall. She remembers standing behind Dain in that moment, feeling something crack quietly inside her chest, though she could not yet explain what it was. She told herself it was just fear, normal fear, the fear anyone would feel before doing something as dangerous as giving away part of their life energy to save a stranger they had never met. She did not yet understand that the crack in her chest was something else entirely. It was the first small tear in a bond she had trusted with her whole heart. The journey to the Alpha King's palace took 3 days, Elira spent most of it staring out the carriage window, watching the trees blur into long streaks of green and brown. Dain sat across from her, talking about how proud the pack would be, how this would raise their family's status, how people would tell stories about them for generations. He never once asked her how she felt. She remembers trying to bring it up on the second night, when they stopped to rest at a small inn along the road. She remembers sitting across from him at a wooden table, picking at a piece of bread she had no appetite for, trying to find the words. "Dain," she said quietly. "What if something goes wrong?" He laughed, the kind of laugh people use when they think a question is silly. "Nothing will go wrong. You have the strongest bond in the region. Everyone says so. But what if it hurts me? What if I lose too much?" He reached across the table and took her hand, the same hand he used to hold when they were teenagers, sneaking away from pack gatherings just to be alone. "You'll be fine, and when this is over, you'll be a hero. We'll be heroes. Think about what that means for us." Us. The word felt strange coming from him in that moment, like it belonged to a different conversation entirely. She let the question go. She told herself he was right. She told herself that fear was normal, that mates were supposed to trust each other, that love sometimes asked hard things of people, and this was simply one of those hard things. She did not yet know that trust and blind obedience are not the same thing, no matter how similar they can feel in the moment. They arrived at the Alpha King's palace on the evening of the third day. The palace itself was enormous, built from pale gray stone that seemed to glow faintly under the moonlight. Guards lined every hallway, their faces tired and worried, as if the entire building had been holding its breath for weeks. Elira remembers the smell the moment they stepped inside. It was a mixture of old herbs, burning candles, and something underneath it all that she recognized immediately from her years of healer training. The smell of a body fighting a losing battle against illness. It was not a pleasant smell. It was the smell of time running out. They were led to a large council room where several pack elders and healers were already waiting. An older woman with silver hair and sharp eyes introduced herself as the head healer of the palace. She explained the process to Elira in careful, measured words, the way healers speak when they know the person in front of them is frightened but trying not to show it. "The transfer works through the mate bond," the healer explained. "We will create a temporary connection between you and the king. Energy will flow from your side to his. It is meant to be one direction only, from the strong to the weak. You may feel tired afterward. Some volunteers feel weak for days. It is normal. And if it doesn't work?" Elira asked. The healer's eyes flickered, just for a moment, toward Dain, who was standing near the door with his arms crossed, watching the conversation like a man supervising a business deal rather than a man standing beside his mate. "If it doesn't work," the healer said carefully, "the king will pass, and you will recover in time." Nobody mentioned what would happen if the bond was not strong enough to survive the transfer without harming the volunteer permanently. Elira suspected they simply did not want to frighten her more than she already was. She suspected right. That night, before the ceremony, she found herself alone in a small guest room while Dain went to speak with the council about arrangements. Arrangements he never explained to her. She sat on the edge of the bed, running her fingers along the fabric of her dress, trying to steady her breathing. She thought about home. She thought about her mother's warm coat, saying. She thought about the way Dain used to sit outside her window, talking to her through wooden shutters, promising he would rather die than see her hurt. She wondered, quietly, where that boy had gone. The next morning, the ceremony began. Elira remembers being led down a long stone hallway toward the king's private chambers, her hands trembling slightly at her sides. She remembers Dain walking beside her, not holding her hand, not offering a single word of comfort, simply walking like a man on his way to an important meeting. The king's chamber was dim, lit only by a few candles and the pale gray light coming through tall windows. The smell of illness was stronger here, mixed with something sweet, like flowers left too long in a vase. King Vasilios Drager lay on a large bed covered in furs, his body thin and folded in on itself in a way that made him look far older than 300 years. His eyes, when they opened, were a strange pale color, like a candle flame right before it goes out. He looked at Elira with an expression she did not expect. Not hunger, not desperation, but something closer to sorrow. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice rough and quiet, "for what he's done." The words confused her at first. She assumed he meant the ceremony itself, the danger she was about to face for his sake. She did not yet understand that he was seeing something she could not yet see. The healers moved quickly after that, preparing the room, laying out old tools wrapped in cloth, chanting quiet words in a language Elira did not recognize. She stood beside the king's bed, while a healer marked something on her wrist with a thin silver blade, just enough to draw a small line of blood. The king's wrist was marked the same way. Elira remembers looking across the room one last time before the ceremony began, searching for Dain's face among the small crowd gathered near the door. He was watching, arms still crossed, his expression unreadable. "You'll thank me," he said, loud enough for the room to hear. "When you're queen." The word landed strangely in her chest, heavy and wrong, like a coin dropped somewhere it did not belong. She did not have time to ask what he meant by it, because the ceremony began, and the world around her narrowed down to nothing but the feeling of silver moonlight-colored energy pulling from her wrist toward the king's. She expected it to hurt. She expected to feel her strength draining away the way water drains from a cracked cup. Instead, something strange happened. The moment the connection formed, she felt something wake up inside her chest instead of drain out of it. It was not pain, it was recognition. The same feeling she used to get as a child when she would meet someone and instantly feel like she already knew them, though she couldn't explain why. The king gasped, his back arching slightly off the bed, not in pain, but in surprise. The head healer, standing nearby, went completely still. "That's not possible," she whispered, though her voice carried through the quiet room like a shout. Elira did not understand at first. The silver cord of energy between her and the king, which was supposed to flow in one direction only, was pulsing instead, like something arguing with itself, moving both ways at once, alive on both ends. According to every text the healers had ever studied, that kind of two-way connection only happened between true mates. The king's ruined eyes found Elira's face, and for the first time since she had entered the room, they looked less like a candle about to go out and more like a man finding his way home after being lost for centuries. "She was never his to give," the king said, his voice growing steadier with every word. "She was mine, before he was born, before any treaty was signed. The old bonds do not get rewritten just because someone decides to hand a person away." The room fell into stunned silence. Elira turned, slowly, to look at Dain. His mouth opened. Nothing came out of it. For the first time since she had known him, Dain Ashford looked genuinely afraid, and it was not fear for her. It was fear for himself, for what he had just lost the moment he decided her worth could be measured and handed over like an object at a negotiating table. Elira did not say anything to him. She did not need to. She turned back toward the king, feeling the strange, quiet relief of finally understanding why her chest had cracked the day the council came asking for volunteers. It was not fear, it was her body recognizing, long before her mind could, that something about the situation was deeply, fundamentally wrong. The healers spent the next several hours documenting what they called a miracle. The king's color returned to his face bit by bit, his breathing steadied, and by evening, he was sitting upright for the first time in weeks, speaking clearly, moving his hands without trembling. Word spread through the palace quickly. By nightfall, the entire council knew what had happened. By the next morning, so did most of the kingdom. Elira spent that first night in a private room near the king's chambers, given to her by healers who seemed unsure of what else to do with a woman who had just upended 300 years of pack law by simply existing. She sat by the window, staring out at the moonlit courtyard below, trying to make sense of everything that had happened. She thought about Dain, about the years they had spent together, about the promises he had made and broken in the span of a single afternoon. She realized, sitting there in the quiet, that she was not mourning him the way she expected to. She was mourning the version of him she had believed in for so many years, a version that, she was beginning to understand, might never have truly existed at all. The next morning, a servant arrived at her door with a message. The king wished to speak with her, alone, in his private study. She found him sitting by a large window, sunlight falling across his face, in a way that made him look decades younger than the dying man she had met just a day before. He gestured for her to sit across from him, and for a long moment, neither of them spoke. "I owe you an explanation," he said finally. "You said I was yours," Elira replied carefully. "Before he was born, before any treaty. What did you mean by that?" The king exhaled slowly, as if the answer had been sitting inside him for centuries, waiting for the right moment to come out. "Fated bonds are strange things," he said. "They do not always form the moment two people meet. Sometimes they form long before, tied to old promises made between families, between pacts, sometimes even between the very land itself. Your family and mine share a history older than you realize. Your grandmother's grandmother made a promise to my grandfather's grandfather, sealed not with paper, but with blood and bond magic, older than most written law. That promise was meant to pass down through the strongest bond in each generation. Dain and I were considered the strongest bond in our generation," Elira said slowly. "Yes," the king said, "but the old promise was never broken. It was simply waiting. Your bond with him was real, in its own way, but it was never meant to be the final bond. The moment true recognition occurred between us, the old promise reasserted itself. That is what you felt yesterday, not a new bond forming. An old one, finally waking up." Elira sat quietly for a long moment, letting the words settle over her. Part of her wanted to be angry, to feel like her entire life had been rearranged without her permission, the same way it had felt when Dain volunteered her without asking. But this felt different somehow. There was no coldness in the king's voice, no sense of ownership or negotiation. There was only quiet honesty, and something that felt, strangely, like relief. "What happens now?" she asked. "That," the king said, "depends entirely on you." Over the following weeks, Elira slowly began to understand what her life had turned into. The council, still stunned by what they called a miracle bond, treated her with a strange mixture of respect and caution, as if she had become something more than herself overnight. Healers studied the old texts, trying to understand exactly how a centuries-old promise could reassert itself the way it had. Elders debated what it meant for pack law, for succession, for the future of the kingdom. Elira, meanwhile, focused on something much simpler, learning who King Vasilios Drager really was, beyond the illness that had nearly taken him, beyond the title that made people bow and whisper when he walked past. She learned that he had a dry sense of humor hidden beneath centuries of formal speech, the kind of humor that only came out when he was comfortable with someone. She learned that he loved gardens, that he used to spend hours as a young alpha walking through the palace grounds simply because it reminded him that some things in the world grew slowly and steadily, without needing to be forced. She learned that despite 300 years of leadership, he still asked for her opinion before making important decisions, something Dain had never once done in all their years together. Word eventually reached her about what had happened to Dain after that day in the throne room. He had been sent back to his pack in disgrace, stripped of the honor his family had hoped to gain from volunteering her in the first place. Instead of becoming a hero, as he had promised her, he became a cautionary tale. A story pack elders told younger wolves about the danger of treating a mate bond like a business arrangement instead of a partnership. Elira did not feel triumphant when she heard the news. She did not feel much of anything at all, if she was honest with herself. It was strange, mourning something that had already been broken long before she understood it was broken. She simply felt lighter, the way a person feels after finally setting down something heavy they had been carrying, without realizing how much it weighed. Months passed. Slowly, carefully, something new began to grow between Elira and the king. Not a business arrangement, not an old promise being fulfilled out of obligation, but something that felt, day by day, more like an actual choice. He asked about her family. He listened when she spoke about her training as a healer. He made space for her opinions in council meetings, something no one in his 300 years of leadership had ever seen him do for anyone else. One evening, nearly a year after the ceremony that changed everything, Elira found herself standing in the palace gardens the king loved so much, watching the sun set behind rows of flowers that had clearly been cared for with real patience. "You could have told me from the beginning," she said, "that the bond was already there before I arrived, that none of this was really Dain's to give away in the first place." The king, standing beside her, was quiet for a moment. "Would you have believed me," he asked, "if I had told you on the day you arrived, frightened and grieving a bond you thought was real? Some truths need time to be understood. I did not want you to accept me simply because an old promise said you should. I wanted you to choose this because it was real to you, not because it was written somewhere centuries ago." Elira looked at him for a long moment, thinking about the years she had spent believing love was supposed to feel like a warm coat in winter, something that covered you and protected you without ever making you feel cold. She realized, standing there in the quiet garden, that she finally understood what her mother had meant all those years ago. It was never about who claimed you first, or who spoke the loudest in a crowded room. It was about who stayed, who listened, and who never once treated you like something to be handed away. She had walked into that palace as a bargaining chip, sacrificed by a man who swore he would rather die than see her hurt, only to hand her over the moment it became convenient for him to do so. She did not walk out as one. She walked out as someone who had finally learned the difference between being chosen out of convenience and being chosen because someone genuinely, quietly, without needing an audience to prove it, wanted her to stay.